What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Form Check Friday. Now, if all y'all are interested in being featured on Form Check Friday and having your lifts put up on the screen behind me and reviewed and critiqued, go ahead and submit your videos to formcheckfriday@gmail.com. We actually made a video, and I'll get Dylan to put it up in an annotation somewhere with some guidelines for how you could be selected for that. So, with that being said, let's dive right in. So last week we left off with Adam here, and Adam's doing some deadlifts. Now, he said that he had some issues where his deadlift felt really strong off the floor, but he said he loses position just above his knees. This is 220 for a triple. And ironically enough, we actually just made a video, came out a couple days ago, maybe last week by the time this video drops, but we addressed specifically the sort of loss of positioning that we're seeing here as he comes off the floor, right? If we look even still, I think as you're pulling into position, you're kind of dumping your pelvis under you. So if you were looking to get a little bit more neutral position there, I would let the knees come in a little bit, let the hips go back a little bit, and that's going to help you kind of mitigate a little bit of that like pelvic dump, if you want to come up with some catch buzzword for it. But more or less, when we're in flexion here, generally speaking, we're a lot faster off the floor, but it gets tougher at lockout. So you can see, I don't think it really even affects him on this set. He's pretty strong through the full range of motion. But I imagine with heavier weights, perhaps is what he's talking about specifically. But there's a few different exercise ways or sort of exercise prescription ways we try to tackle that. One of them would be using pause deadlifts to try to work on strengthening and improving your ability to achieve and maintain position off the floor. The other would be just straight up tackling the top end using some accommodating resistance. Now, in your case, you could also probably cue yourself to kind of allow the knees in a little bit, push your hips back a little bit. It seems like you're kind of overdoing that classic cue of pushing your knees out as hard as you possibly can and like trying to wedge your hips into the bar, which often results in that sort of dumped posture. Again, might not be worth completely going back to the drawing board, deload to empty bar and learn to be totally neutral. There's nothing to say you're going to be stronger that way necessarily. However, if you can, use some of those strategies I mentioned to strengthen the deadlift and to try to get yourself a little bit more consistent, I think that's going to go a long ways for you. So hopefully that helps. And our next lifter here is Rocky. Now, Rocky said he's a young guy. He's 14 years old. This is his PR of 315 pounds. He's wondering, he said he's not sure if he hits depth, and I'm going to say no. If you were competing, that would not be depth. And I think that was his main question, but I think there's actually a few things we can try to help you with here, Rocky. First off, super cool to see a really young guy getting into lifting, and a 315 squat, even if it's a little bit high at 14 years old, is 315 pounds more than I could squat when I was that age. So I'd like to encourage that 100%. So I don't really see the walkout here, but it does look like we're taking a lot of steps. So you probably don't need to come quite this far back. It looks like you might be unracking off of a riser because unfortunately with these kinds of racks, the pin height is, they're pretty far from one another. So either you're on your tippy toes or you're doing half a squat to get it out of the rack. So the riser can be an okay solution. Now, when you unrack, I want you to think about, that riser changes everything. Get down safely off the riser first and then, do your walkout like you would normally. So 1 foot back, other foot back, and then adjust 1 foot for width, and try not to take a lot of little stutter steps. I think that's something that a lot of people mess up. Now, bar position actually looks pretty good here. Upper back position looks okay. And then when we start the rep, watch his head kind of crane back, and he goes into a lot of sort of overextension here. So we're really working on trying to drive the chest out, trying to stay super, super extended. And I think that's part of why it's going to seem really hard to hit depth. So what I would recommend is, pick a focal point for, something to look at about here. So our head stays a little bit more in line with our back. Don't focus so much on this arch in the back. Instead, shift a little bit of focus to the front of your abdomen and think about pulling your ribs down on top of your abs as you kind of brace out into the belt. And then I want you to just get used to sitting deeper. So whether it's some pause squats, tempo squats, or something like that, those can all be really useful variations in terms of learning how that bottom position feels, as well as just getting stronger in the bottom position. So all told, no, it wasn't depth, but I think there's a lot of really good things here to build on and a really impressive base level of strength. So I'd love to see you continue lifting and sort of stick with it over the years. But those would be my recommendations in terms of things that you could try to fix and tackle, and hopefully some ideas on how to do that. Up next, we have Evan. Now, Evan's doing some bench press here. He says he's been training a little over a year. His lower body lifts, he says, are moving well, but his bench just isn't progressing the way he wants it to. He says usually when he misses about 1 to 2 inches off the chest. And I think right away, I can identify a number of reasons why. So first things first, let's look at this unrack and the position we're in before we start the rep. So when you go to unrack, our shoulders pop up, and then we're still protracted, meaning the shoulder blades are still forward once you've unracked the bar. So number one, let's try to get this bench in a little bit more, so your head is, maybe a few inches higher, so you're not having to reach quite as far back. Even with the handoff, which is great. It's good to have a training partner. You're protracting your shoulders. You're really losing a lot of good upper back position. So I want you to really focus on shoulder blades. I want you to think about pulling them down towards your butt and together, either like pinching into the bench or pinching towards one another, and really, really put a lot of your focus and effort and energy throughout your bench press into that. So that's the setup and unrack. Now let's get to the bench press itself. The reason we're missing in the bottom position is because we're not training the bottom position. The way that you're benching right now, you come down to about here, and then basically you drop it, use a lot of aggressive leg drive, and try to bounce it back up. So we're not going to get stronger in the bottom position if we don't train it. So we're going to need to try to control the bottom of the range of motion, and we're going to need to try to keep the leg drive on consistently. So I would recommend some long pause work, some pin press. If you can get these pins set to the point where right as that bar comes into contact with your chest, it rests slightly on the pins. Those are some good ways to try to develop a little bit more strength in the bottom of the range of motion. The other thing I might play with is some tempo work. So you're slowing down the eccentric. You're going nice and slow all the way through that range of motion. You can see on this rep, specifically, we lose all kinds of back position. The butt comes up off the bench a little bit, and the elbows flare really aggressively, meaning we've kind of lost all of the upper back position, and we're going to go for another rep here. So we also might just need to adjust the training loads that we're working with, that we're expecting. A lot of the times we can just be a little bit overzealous with load selection, and this was not your best idea to go for a third rep here. This second rep was at 10 RPE, right? Looking at this, I'm not thinking you're getting another rep there. And I'm not trying to be judgmental or rude or anything. I'm just saying, like this, that rep, we dropped it completely into the chest. We came back up. As we start to press, we lose all shoulder position, and then it just comes back down. So just, leave a few reps in the tank when you're thinking about how many reps you're going to do, when you're thinking about how much weight to put on the bar. That can be a really important aspect of making solid progress in any lift, is simply to make sure that you're using an appropriate amount of weight so that you can, complete all of your sets and all of your reps and get a good training stimulus in. Our next submission comes from Luke. Now, Luke's doing some deadlifts. He says he's been training for 3 years, competing for 1 year, and he has trouble, he says, keeping his back neutral. So he's wondering if I have any advice for him on how to achieve a more neutral position. And he says he loses it when the weight starts to get heavy. So the first thing I'm going to say here is that, everything kind of shifts this way as we start the lift. So, that tells me there's probably a lot of shear force on the back, just meaning that the back's trying really, really hard to maintain this, and the force is all kind of coming this way, which generally means we're going to see some flexion. So one of the first ways we try to address these issues is to change the angle of the torso such that, if we're more upright, then the force is going to play a little bit more through the spine, like a column as opposed to a lever, and you can kind of think about those two concepts. But more or less, if you're trying to get your back more flat, now there's nothing to say that there's anything wrong with a little bit of flexion in your deadlift, but it does look to me like these are mostly kind of a stiff-legged pattern. So whether or not you fix the back and it looks totally neutral and perfect, and you know, you look like Yuri Belkin or whoever, I don't know who the big conventional guys are because sumo is cooler, but yeah, so I think the big thing here is to try to get your torso angle a little bit more upright. So I would try to get you to drop your hips, let the knees forward a tiny bit, and try to use a little bit more quad when you're starting the lift. Try to get that feeling of like it's a leg press. So you're pulling yourself kind of aggressively into position, and then you're just thinking about sort of pushing the floor away. So with the back like this, like I said, a lot of the time we're gonna end up with a little bit of flexion. If we can get that back a little bit more upright. Now, I don't want you to like sit straight upright like you would see an Olympic lifter before the first pull of a clean and jerk or something. But I do think that there's a very limited amount of dropping the hips or like pulling into tension. So when you're setting this up, I want you to think about pulling your hips down, not just sitting them down. And then I want you to think about pulling your shoulder blades down into your waist, into your butt, so that we can get the lats kind of all the way engaged through the posterior, and get a lot of that sort of tension built up in more of like a vertical kind of orientation. See there, as we start to go through these last few reps, the hips become higher and higher, like this back angle versus when we're starting, we're a little bit more upright. And then we go and go and go, and then the hips get higher and higher and higher as we go through, right? So drop those hips a little bit. You can push your knees out sometimes to help you get a little bit more extension in the low back. That little bit of external rotation in the hip sometimes allows that pelvis to get into a little bit more of an anterior tilt. Yeah, that would be my recommendation. So hopefully some of that helped you. All right, and now we have Maximus doing some squats here. So Maximus, he says he's been lifting about 9 months. He's trying really hard to bulk. He says he's 6'5", about 220 pounds, and he says the eating and the bulking is actually harder than the lifting for him. And honestly, Maximus, I think you have a really good squat, man. I think there's a few things we can try to fine tune a little bit here. So number one is going to be the walkout. If we can get, we got 5-6 steps there. So try to limit that down. Stand it up like you're already in a squat. So when we unrack, we want to be very, very tight, very braced. I want you to approach that unrack like you're already in the middle of a max effort squat. Then I want you to take one very purposeful step back. And if you need more clearance from the rack, make it a longer step, and then another step back, and then adjust for width, right? We want to try to get the walkout down to like 3-4 steps at most. All right, next, upper back position looks good. We're breaking hips and knees at the same time, meaning that he's pushing his butt back as his knees come forward. A lot of the times people will just push their knees forward. Their torso will stay really upright. Then they'll hit the bottom and the torso will come kind of falling forward. Maximus does a pretty good job of that. This first rep, I think we're maybe a little on the line with depth, but looks pretty good. We see the hips shoot up a tiny little bit, but I don't think that's really an issue there. It doesn't seem that consistent. The second rep, great depth, but we really kind of fall into the bottom. There's a totally different tempo from the first rep to the second. So let's just watch this through. So first rep, smooth, controlled, pretty good depth. Hips kick a tiny little bit. Second rep, really fall into the bottom. We see the upper back give a little bit. And then the third rep, bit more control, and a relatively clean rep, albeit a challenging one. So I think the big thing is just going to be practicing more to get more consistent with your positioning throughout. The second rep here, I think we're really kind of pushing the knees forward more than sitting back. And I think generally speaking, we want to kind of find a balance of the two, because if we sit back too much, we're going to be way back on the heels. We're going to have a lot of that hip shoot. The back's going to fall forward. The knees are going to shoot back. If we're too far forward on the toes, the knees are going to come really far forward. Then we're going to hit the hole and the chest is going to fall. So we want to make sure we have a nice even sort of pressure through the feet. And we achieve that by pushing the hips back slightly, letting the knees forward slightly, and trying to think about that foot pressure and just keeping things nice and consistent and balanced. So I think that that's probably one of the places I would start. The next place is I would try to focus on keeping some more tension in your upper back when you're in the hole, when you're in the very bottom of the squat, because we can see on this last rep here, we do start to see that elbow kind of creep up a little bit, which means the bar is probably going to tip forward a tiny bit. So a little bit more tightness in the upper back, a little bit more consistency in the tempo of your reps, and let's focus on keeping that foot pressure nice and consistent and balanced between pushing the hips back and the knees forward. And we're going to leave you all with Daniel's bench press here. There we go. All right. So Daniel's 21 years old. He's been lifting for a little over a year. He says his bench has gone from 185 to 275, which is very impressive in a year. Putting 90 pounds on your bench press, pretty damn good progress if you ask me. He says he still has a bit of a sticking point though, and he wants to know if there's anything he can do to try to alleviate that sticking point and smooth out his range of motion. You can see it there, kind of slows down in the middle. So what we're going to do is we're going to let this play through one more time. Again, if anybody is interested in having their lifts critiqued, go ahead and send them to formcheckfriday@gmail.com. And I want everybody to watch this through this last time. And if you have any suggestions or help or comments for Daniel here, go ahead and leave them in the comments below. And we're going to start next episode with Daniel, and I will give my critique. So I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend, and thank you all for watching Form Check Friday. We'll see you next time.